He didn't collapse in that dry field because he was lost. He collapsed because he had absolutely nothing left to give. Lying in the dirt, he was just a skeleton wrapped in fur, destroyed by a journey no dog should ever make. He had walked 50 miles on raw, bloody feet, driven by a love that nearly killed him. Grab your coffee and stay with me, because the truth behind this collapse will leave you absolutely speechless. Please like the video and comment. I'm watching to see what happens next. The afternoon sun was relentless, baking the ground until it was hard as stone. It was late October, yet the heat refused to leave, hanging over the rural farmlands like a heavy blanket. This was not the kind of day where birds sang or leaves rustled gently. It was quiet, the kind of absolute silence that usually means something is wrong. Officer Hope Holmes drove her patrol cruiser down the long gravel road that led to the Miller property. The tires crunched loudly against the rocks, kicking up a cloud of dust that lingered in the air behind her. She had been on duty since early morning, dealing with minor traffic stops and paperwork. But this call felt different. The dispatch radio had been brief. A farmer named Miller had called to complain about a large animal trespassing on his land. He had said it was lying in the back furrows and had not moved since the sun came up. Miller was not known for his kindness to animals. He viewed them as tools or pests, nothing in between. Because Hope knew this, and because she was part of the K-9 unit and had a soft spot for anything with 4 legs, she decided to take the call herself rather than sending animal control. She parked the cruiser at the edge of the field where the gravel turned into deep, dried tractor ruts. Stepping out of the car, the heat hit her instantly. She adjusted her belt and squinted against the glare. The field stretched out for acres, just brown dirt and dead stalks from the last harvest. It looked empty. However, as she scanned the horizon, she saw it. Far out, maybe 200 yards away, there was a dark shape disrupting the pattern of the dirt. It did not look like a rock, and did not look like a piece of farming equipment. It looked like a heap of discarded rags. Hello, my amazing friends and family. Welcome back to Vigilant Heart Tales. Before we jump deep into today's story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing all your names and countries. And don't forget to check out the other stories on the channel. Tomorrow, I've got another crazy one coming that I know you'll enjoy. All right, let's get into it. Hope began to walk. Her heavy boots made a steady rhythm on the hard clumps of soil. With every step she took, a feeling of dread grew in her stomach. As she got closer, the shape became clearer. It was definitely a dog. It was a German shepherd. Hope felt a sudden pull in her chest because she worked with shepherds every day. She knew them as powerful, energetic creatures, full of life and drive. But the animal lying in front of her looked nothing like the partner she knew. He was lying completely flat on his side. He was so thin that his ribs were clearly visible through his matted, dusty coat. His black and tan fur, which should have been shiny, was dull and covered in the gray dust of the field. He blended in so perfectly with the ground that if she had not been looking for him, she would have walked right past him. Although Hope was making noise as she approached, the dog did not move. He did not lift his head. He did not twitch an ear. He lay there with the absolute stillness of the dead. Hope rushed the last few steps and dropped to her knees in the dirt, not caring about the dust getting on her uniform pants. She reached out a trembling hand toward the dog's neck. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, her voice soft and shaking slightly. "Can you hear me?" For a terrifying second, there was no response. But then she saw it, a shallow, weak rise of his ribs. He was alive, but he was holding on by a thread so thin it was about to snap. At the sound of her voice, the dog tried to respond. It was heartbreaking to watch. His instincts screamed at him to get up, to acknowledge the human, but his body had nothing left to give. He managed to open his eyes, just a slit. His eyes were clouded and sunken deep into his skull. They were rimmed with dried mud. But what hit Hope the hardest was the expression in them. There was no anger. There was no fear. There was just a deep, overwhelming sadness. It was the look of a soul that had tried its hardest and had finally accepted defeat. He let out a sound that was not quite a whine. It was a long, rattling exhale. He tried to lift his nose off the dirt to smell her hand, but he could only lift it an inch before his head fell back down. The effort seemed to drain the last bit of energy he had. "No, you don't," Hope said firmly, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. "You do not give up on me now. I am here." She moved her hand to stroke his head. His skin was hot to the touch, burning with fever and dehydration. His fur felt coarse. As she stroked him, trying to offer some comfort, her eyes traveled down his body to his legs. Hope gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. Oh my God. His paws were destroyed. They were not just cut or scraped. The thick, tough pads that protect a dog's feet were completely gone. They were worn away to raw, red meat. His feet were caked with a mixture of dried blood, dirt, and infection. His claws were worn down so far that some were split down the middle. These were not the injuries of a dog that had been running around a soft field for a day. These were the injuries of a traveler. This dog had been walking on pavement, on rocks, on gravel for miles and miles. He had walked until his feet literally fell apart. "You have been walking a long time, haven't you?" Hope whispered. The realization made her chest ache. He had walked until the pain must have been excruciating. And then he had walked some more. He had only stopped because his body physically collapsed. Hope looked around the desolate field. There was no water here, no shade. If she left him to go get help, he might not be alive when she came back. The sun was beating down on him, and he was too weak to even lift his head to drink if she had water. She made a decision instantly. She reached for her radio. "Dispatch, this is Holmes. Cancel animal control. I am transporting the subject myself. I am heading to the clinic on 4th Street. Tell them to have a table ready immediately." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Copy, Holmes. Be advised, transport of strays in a patrol unit is against protocol." "I don't care about protocol," Hope said, her voice sharp. "He is dying. I am moving him now." She clicked the radio off. She turned back to the dog. She knew moving him would hurt, but she had no choice. "I'm going to pick you up now, okay," she told him softly. "I know it hurts. I am sorry, but I have to get you out of this dirt." She slid her arms under his chest and his hips. He was a large breed and should have been heavy, but when she lifted him, she was shocked by how light he was. He was just bones wrapped in skin. He let out a low, guttural groan of pain as she lifted him, his head lolling back against her shoulder. Hope held him tight, pressing his dusty face against her chest to support his neck. She could smell the sickness on him, the scent of old blood and starvation, but she held him closer. She carried him across the uneven ground, stumbling once or twice in the ruts, but never loosening her grip. When she reached the cruiser, she did not put him in the metal cage in the back. She opened the back passenger door and laid him gently on the soft seat. She took off her uniform jacket and rolled it up, placing it under his head like a pillow. "Hang on," she said, slamming the door and running to the driver's seat. "Just stay with me." The drive to the veterinary clinic was the longest 20 minutes of Hope's life. She kept glancing in the rearview mirror. The dog was a motionless lump on the back seat. Every time she had to brake or turn, she prayed he was still breathing. When she finally pulled up to the glass doors of the clinic, she did not bother parking in a designated spot. She pulled right up to the curb, killed the engine, and ran inside. "I need help," she shouted as she burst through the doors. Dr. Evans, the head veterinarian, came rushing out from the back. He was a man who had seen everything in his 30 years of practice, but when he followed Hope to the car and saw the dog, he went silent. "Get the stretcher," Dr. Evans ordered his technician, Sarah, "right now." They worked together to lift the dog from the car onto the stretcher. Inside the clinic, it was cool and smelled of antiseptic. They wheeled him into the trauma room and lifted him onto the metal exam table. "He is severely dehydrated," Dr. Evans said, his hands moving quickly over the dog's body. He lifted the dog's lip to check his gums. They were pale and tacky. "His heart rate is very weak. We need to get fluids into him immediately or his organs will shut down. Sarah was already moving, shaving a patch of fur on the dog's front leg to find a vein. It was difficult because his blood pressure was so low, his veins had collapsed. Hope stood in the corner of the room, watching helplessly. She felt like an intruder, but she could not leave him. "Look at his feet, doctor," Hope said, her voice trembling. Dr. Evans moved to the back of the table and lifted one of the dog's paws. He took a sharp breath in. He gently cleaned away some of the dirt with a wet cloth. "This is not just an injury," Dr. Evans said quietly. "This is wear. Extreme wear. Hope, this dog has been walking on asphalt and concrete for weeks. Look at the calluses on his elbows. Look at the muscle wastage." He was traveling, Hope said. He wasn't just lost in that field. He was going somewhere. "Let's see if he has a name," Sarah said. She grabbed the microchip scanner from the wall hook. It was a long shot. Most dogs found this far out in the country were farm dogs or strays that were never chipped. But Sarah ran the wand over the dog's shoulder blades anyway. A loud beep filled the room. Hope jumped. Her heart soared. "He has a chip? That means he has a family." "He does," Sarah said, looking at the small screen on the scanner. "I have a number." "Call them," Hope said. "Tell them we found their boy. Tell them he is alive." Dr. Evans went to the computer in the corner of the room to type in the number. Hope moved to the table and took the dog's head in her hands. He was still barely conscious, his eyes closed, the four fluids slowly dripping into his leg. "You hear that?" she whispered to him. "We found them. You are going home." At the word home, the dog's tail gave a tiny, almost invisible twitch. It was the first sign of recognition he had shown. It broke Hope's heart. He knew that word. That was what he had been fighting for. "The owner is listed as Arthur Davidson," Dr. Evans said from the computer. He paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. A frown creased his forehead. "What is it?" Hope asked. "Arthur Davidson," Dr. Evans repeated. "I know that name. He was a client of my brother's clinic over in Oak Haven." "Oak Haven?" Hope asked. "That is the next county over. That is south of here." "Yes," Dr. Evans said. "I am calling the number." The room went quiet. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the fluid pump. Hope watched the doctor's face as he held the phone to his ear. She saw his expression change from professional concern to confusion, and then to a cold, hard anger. "Hello? Yes, this is Dr. Evans. I am calling about a German Shepherd registered to Arthur Davidson." "Yes, I see." Dr. Evans's eyes narrowed. He looked at the dog on the table, then back at the wall. "I see," he said again, his voice dropping an octave. "And when was this? And you left him where?" "He is currently on my table, nearly dead from exhaustion. No, I do not think you understand what I am saying." Hope felt a chill run down her spine. The conversation was not going the way it should. There was no joy on the other end of the line. Dr. Evans slammed the phone down into the receiver with force. He took a deep breath, gripping the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned white. He turned to face Hope and Sarah. "Arthur Davidson passed away 2 weeks ago," Dr. Evans said, his voice tight. "Oh," Hope said, feeling a wave of sadness. "So the dog got loose during the funeral? He ran away?" "No," Dr. Evans said, spitting the words out. "That was Arthur's son on the phone. He said the dog, his name is Rocky, was too much of a burden now that his father was gone. He said Rocky was old, he was depressed, and he wouldn't eat. So they dumped him?" Hope asked, her hands balling into fists. "They drove him to a farm," Dr. Evans explained. "A friend's farm in Willow Creek. They dropped him off the day after the funeral. They said they thought he would be fine living in a barn." Hope froze. She looked at the map on the wall of the clinic. She looked at the location of Willow Creek. It was north. Oak Haven, where Arthur had lived, was south. The field where she found Rocky was exactly in the middle. "Willow Creek is 50 miles away," Hope whispered. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. "Doctor," he wasn't wandering. Dr. Evans nodded slowly. His eyes filled with tears. He escaped the farm in Willow Creek, and he was walking south. He was walking home, Hope said, her voice cracking. He walked 50 miles. He walked 50 miles on concrete and rocks and highways. He was trying to get back to Arthur, Sarah said, wiping her eyes. He didn't know Arthur was gone. He just knew he wasn't where he was supposed to be. Hope looked at Rocky. He looked so small and broken on the table. He had not been abandoned in that field. He had collapsed there. He had walked until the pads of his feet tore off. He had walked until his muscles had nothing left to burn. He had walked through rain, through heat, through hunger, driven by a loyalty that was absolute. He just wanted to go home. He just wanted his dad. What did the son say? Hope asked, her voice low. Is he coming to get him? He asked if he needed to pay to have the dog put down. Dr. Evans said, disgust evident in his tone. He said, and I quote, I thought that dog would have died by now. He does not want him back. Hope looked at the dog. She looked at the gray hair on his muzzle. She looked at the battered paws that had carried him across the county just to say goodbye to a ghost. She reached out and took Rocky's paw in her hand, careful of the raw skin. No, she said firmly. He doesn't want him? Good, because he doesn't deserve him. Hope, Dr. Evans said gently. He is very old. I would estimate he is 15. That is ancient for a shepherd. His teeth are rotted. His hips are bad. And now with this damage, he is in a lot of pain. The recovery will be very hard. No, Hope said. She leaned down, pressing her forehead against the dog's forehead. He smelled of dust and sickness, but underneath that, he smelled like a good, loyal dog. I am not letting him die thinking nobody wanted him, Hope said fiercely. I am not letting his last memory be the dirt of that field or the rejection of that family. He walked 50 miles for love, Doctor. The least I can do is give him some love back. Dr. Evans softened. He nodded. Okay, we will keep him here tonight. We will flush his system with fluids and manage the pain. But Hope, the night is going to be critical. He has lost a lot of strength. I cannot promise you he will wake up tomorrow. He will make it, Hope said, looking into Rocky's sleeping face. He is a soldier. He is not done yet. She pulled a metal chair up to the side of the table. I am staying. You don't have to stay, Sarah said gently. We will watch him. I'm staying, Hope repeated. He walked alone for 2 weeks. He is not spending one more minute of his life alone. As the sun went down outside, turning the sky a deep purple, the clinic grew quiet. Hope sat in the dim light, holding the paw of a dog named Rocky. She watched the slow rise and fall of his chest. Every breath was a struggle, a battle between his exhausted body and his unbreakable spirit. Around midnight, Rocky started to whimper in his sleep. His legs twitched, running in a dream. Hope wondered if he was dreaming of the road, of the endless asphalt and the hot sun. Or maybe he was dreaming of Arthur, sitting in a chair, waiting for him. Sho, Hope whispered, stroking his ears. You are safe. You don't have to run anymore. But as the clock ticked toward morning, Rocky's breathing changed. It became shallower. The steady beep of the heart monitor became erratic. Dr. Evans came rushing back in, checking screens. His heart is struggling, Dr. Evans said, adjusting the foreflow. He is crashing, Hope. Hope stood up, gripping the edge of the table. Rocky, she called out, her voice loud in the quiet room. Rocky, stay here. Do not go. The dog let out a sharp gasp. His head arched back. The monitor let out a long, warning tone. Hope stared at the screen, then at the dog who had given everything for a love that was no longer there. He had walked through hell to get home. She just prayed she hadn't found him too late. Come on, Rocky, she begged, tears streaming down her face. Please, just breathe. The sound of the heart monitor was the only thing filling the room, a high-pitched warning that cut through the air like a knife. Hope stood frozen, her hands gripping the cold metal edge of the exam table, watching the rise and fall of Rocky's chest become terrifyingly shallow. Dr. Evans did not speak. He only moved. His hands were steady, working with the precision that came from decades of saving lives that hung by a thread. He adjusted the foreflow, pushed a syringe of emergency medication into the line, and placed his stethoscope firmly against the dog's ribcage. "Come on, old man," Dr. Evans whispered, his voice tight. "Do not quit on us now." Hope felt a lump form in her throat that was so hard it hurt to swallow. She had only known this dog for a few hours, yet the thought of him dying right here, after fighting so hard to get home, felt unbearable. It would be cruel for his journey to end on a sterile table under fluorescent lights, without ever feeling the warmth of a home again. Because she felt helpless, she did the only thing she could do. She moved to his head and leaned close to his ear. "You listen to me, Rocky," she said, her voice shaking but fierce. "You walked 50 miles. You fought off hunger. You fought off the cold. You do not get to give up now just because you are safe. You have to stay." For a minute, which felt like an hour, nothing happened. The monitor continued its erratic warning. Rocky's eyes remained closed, his body limp and heavy. However, slowly, the medication began to work. The fluids rushed into his depleted veins, giving his heart the volume it needed to pump. The frantic rhythm on the monitor slowed down. It became deeper, stronger. Beep, beep, beep. Dr. Evans let out a long, heavy breath and straightened his back. He pulled the stethoscope from his ears and looked at Hope. He looked exhausted. "He is back with us," the doctor said softly. His heart was working too hard with too little blood volume. It almost gave out, but he is stable for now. Hope slumped against the wall, her legs suddenly feeling like jelly. "Thank God." "He is not out of the woods, Hope," Dr. Evans warned, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "The night is going to be very long. His body is in shock. He has used up every reserve of energy he had. Now he has to find a way to rebuild it." Sarah, the vet tech, brought a warm blanket from the dryer. She draped it gently over Rocky's shivering body, tucking it around his bandaged paws. Even in his sleep, Rocky let out a soft groan of comfort as the warmth settled over him. "I am not leaving," Hope said again, pulling the metal chair closer to the table. "I didn't think you would," Dr. Evans said with a tired smile. "I will be in the back office if the monitor changes. Sarah will check on him every hour." As the doctor and Sarah left the room, the silence returned. But this time it was not the terrifying silence of the field. It was a peaceful, rhythmic silence. Hope sat down and rested her chin on her arms on the table, just inches from Rocky's nose. She watched him sleep. Up close, the damage was even more heartbreaking. His nose was dry and cracked. His muzzle was gray with age, showing that he had lived a long life before this tragedy. There were small scars on his face, perhaps from his life on the farm or from his journey through the woods. Hope thought about the family who had thrown him away. She thought about the son who viewed this living, breathing soul as a burden. It made her angry, a hot, burning anger in her chest. But then she looked at Rocky's face, and the anger melted into sadness. He didn't know he was a burden. He just knew he loved Arthur. He had spent his whole life being a good boy, waiting by the door, chasing balls, resting his head on a knee. And when Arthur disappeared, Rocky didn't understand. He just wanted to find him. "You are a good boy," Hope whispered into the quiet room. "The best boy." The hours dragged on. Hope drifted in and out of a light doze, waking up every time Rocky moved or sighed. Around 3 a.m., Rocky woke up. He didn't bark. He didn't try to stand. He simply lifted his head slowly and looked around the strange room. His eyes were still cloudy, but the panic was gone. He looked at the 4-pole. He looked at the bandage on his leg. Finally, he looked at Hope. He stared at her for a long time. Hope didn't move. She let him study her. She wanted him to know she was not a threat. She wanted him to remember her voice from the field. "Hi," she said softly. Rocky blinked. He stretched his neck out, just a little, and sniffed her hand. His nose was cold. He took a deep breath, taking in her scent, the smell of the uniform, the dust from the field, and something else, kindness. Seemingly satisfied, he let his head drop back on the table. But this time, he laid it right on top of Hope's hand. He let out a deep sigh, his heavy body relaxing completely. He was claiming her. Or perhaps he was just thankful he wasn't alone. Hope stayed like that for the rest of the night, her hand pinned under his heavy head, afraid to move in case she woke him. Her arm went numb, but she didn't care. When the sun finally began to rise, casting a pale orange light through the clinic blinds, Dr. Evans returned. He checked the monitor and smiled. "He is much stronger," the doctor said. "His gums are pinker. The fluids did their job." "Can I take him home?" Hope asked. She felt stiff and tired, but she wanted to get him out of this sterile place. She wanted him on a soft rug. "I want to keep him until noon," Dr. Evans said. "I want to get one more bag of fluids into him and change his bandages. His feet are going to need a lot of care. Hope, you'll have to change the dressings twice a day and keep him from licking them. And you have to feed him soft food. His teeth are in terrible shape. Chewing kibble would be agony for him." "I can do all of that," Hope promised. By the time noon arrived, Rocky was awake and more alert. When Hope stood up to sign the discharge papers, Rocky tried to follow her. He pushed himself up on his front legs, his back legs scrambling for traction on the metal table. "Whoa, easy," Dr. Evans said, catching him. Rocky let out a sharp whine when his weight hit his bandaged feet. The pain must have been intense, like walking on open blisters. But he didn't stop. He looked at Hope with desperate eyes. He was afraid she was leaving him there. "I'm right here," Hope said, rushing back to his side. "I'm not going anywhere without you. We are a team now." Getting him into the car was easier this time because he wasn't unconscious, but it was still a struggle. He was too weak to jump, so Hope had to lift him again. He was heavy, awkward, dead weight, but he trusted her enough to let her pick him up. As she drove away from the clinic, Rocky didn't sleep. He sat up on the back seat, wobbling slightly as the car turned corners. He pressed his nose against the window, watching the world go by. Hope watched him in the mirror. He was looking at the fields. He was looking at the road. Is he looking for the route? She wondered. Is he still trying to figure out which way is south? "We are going to a new home, Rocky," she told him. "Arthur isn't there, buddy, but it's a good place." When they arrived at Hope's small house, it was quiet. She lived alone, a life dedicated to her job. Her house was tidy and warm, with hardwood floors and a big fireplace in the living room. She opened the back door of the car. Rocky hesitated. The jump down was too far for his painful feet. Hope reached in and helped him down, letting his paws touch the grass gently. As soon as his feet hit the ground, Rocky froze. He lifted his head and sniffed the air. He smelled the neighbor's barbecue. He smelled the pine trees. But he didn't smell what he wanted. He didn't smell Arthur. His tail, which had been tucked between his legs, lowered even further. He looked at Hope, confused. This isn't the right house, his eyes seemed to say. "Why are we here?" "Come on," Hope said, her voice cheerful, trying to mask the sadness she felt for him. "Let's go inside." She led him up the steps. Inside, she had prepared everything. On the way home, she had stopped at the pet store. There was a brand new, thick, orthopedic bed made of memory foam in the corner of the living room. There were bowls of fresh water and a plate of soft, wet food that smelled like chicken. Rocky walked into the living room. His claws clicked softly on the wood floor. He limped heavily, favoring his left front paw, which seemed to be the worst. He walked a slow circle around the room, sniffing the couch, the rug, the fireplace. He was searching. He was looking for a familiar chair. He was looking for an old coat hanging on a hook. He was looking for the man he had walked 50 miles to find. When he realized the room was empty of the person he loved, he stopped in the middle of the floor. He let out a low, mournful sound. It wasn't a howl. It was a cry of pure disappointment. He looked at Hope, and for the first time he looked old. Really old. The journey had kept him going because he had a mission. Now that the mission was over, and Arthur wasn't found, the adrenaline faded, leaving only the exhaustion and the pain. "I know," Hope whispered, kneeling on the floor next to him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur. "I know you miss him. I know it hurts, but he would want you to be safe. He wouldn't want you walking in the dark anymore. Rocky leaned against her. He didn't eat the food. He didn't drink the water. He simply walked over to the new bed, sniffed it once, and collapsed onto it. The memory foam rose up to support his aching joints. He let out a long sigh, closed his eyes, and turned his face away from the room, facing the wall. He was grieving. The first few days were a blur of quiet routine. Hope took a few days of leave from the police force to stay with him. She knew that if she left him alone, he might try to escape. He might try to find the door and start walking again. Rocky slept for 20 hours a day. It was a deep, restorative sleep. His body was repairing the damage of the journey. Hope changed his bandages every morning and evening. It was a painful process. The gauze would stick to the raw wounds, and she had to soak them off gently with warm water. Rocky never growled. He never tried to bite. Even when she knew it hurt him, he would just lick her hand gently, as if to say, "It's okay. I know you are trying to help." His teeth were another problem. Dr. Evans was right. They were rotten and worn down. He struggled to eat anything that wasn't basically soup. Hope started cooking for him, boiling chicken and rice until it was mush, hand-feeding him small bites. Despite the care, there was a distance in him. He was polite, but he wasn't present. He spent his waking hours staring at the front door. If a car drove past the house, his ears would prick up, and he would lift his head, hope lighting up his eyes for a split second before fading away when the car didn't stop. He was waiting for Arthur to come and pick him up. He thought this was just a temporary stop. He didn't understand that Arthur was never coming. On the fourth night, a thunderstorm rolled in. It started with a low rumble in the distance, but quickly turned into a violent downpour. Thunder shook the windows of Hope's small house. Lightning flashed, illuminating the living room in stark white bursts. Hope was in the kitchen making tea when a crack of thunder, so loud it felt like an explosion, shook the floorboards. Immediately following the thunder, she heard a sound from the living room, a scramble of claws and a panic-stricken yelp. She ran into the room. Rocky was not on his bed. He was pacing frantically back and forth in front of the door, panting heavily. His eyes were wide with terror. He was clawing at the door frame, tearing at the wood, trying to get out. "Rocky, stop!" Hope cried, rushing toward him. He didn't hear her. The storm had triggered something in him. Maybe he had been caught in a storm during his 50-mile walk. Maybe he was afraid of being trapped. He was throwing his heavy body against the door, heedless of the pain in his feet. "Rock, it's okay." Hope grabbed his collar, trying to pull him back. He was strong, fueled by panic. He pulled away, slipping on the wood floor and crashing onto his side. He scrambled up immediately, whining, a high-pitched sound of pure fear. He needed to hide. He needed to run. Hope realized she couldn't physically restrain him without hurting him. She needed to break his panic. She dropped to the floor, sitting cross-legged right in front of the door, blocking his exit. She didn't grab him. She just sat there, calm and solid. "Rocky," she said, her voice low and steady. "Look at me." He paced, panting, drool dripping from his mouth. He looked at the door, then at her. "You are safe here," Hope said. "The storm can't touch you. The rain can't touch you. I am right here." She held out her hand. Rocky stopped pacing. He was trembling so hard his whole body shook. He looked at Hope's hand. Then he looked at her face. Lightning flashed again, lighting up the room. Rocky flinched, crouching low. "Come here," Hope whispered. Slowly, hesitantly, Rocky crawled toward her. He didn't go to the door. He crawled to her. He pressed his wet nose against her neck and buried his head under her arm, trying to hide from the noise. Hope wrapped her arms around his shaking shoulders. She rocked him back and forth, humming a soft tune. She felt his heart hammering against her ribs. They sat like that for an hour while the storm raged outside. Hope didn't move. She let him hide in her protection. She became his shelter. Finally, the thunder faded into a distant rumble, and the rain slowed to a gentle patter. Rocky's breathing slowed. The trembling stopped. He pulled his head back and looked at Hope. For the first time since she found him in the field, his eyes were clear. He wasn't looking through her, searching for Arthur. He was looking at her. He licked her chin. Just once. A rough sandpaper lick. It was a thank you. But more than that, it was an acceptance. He realized in that moment that while Arthur was gone, he wasn't alone in the storm. He had a new protector. You ready to go back to bed? Hope asked softly. Rocky stood up. His legs were stiff, but he walked back to his orthopedic bed. He circled twice and lay down. But this time, he didn't turn his face to the wall. He lay facing Hope, his eyes watching her as she stood up and turned off the lights. Hope went to her bedroom to get a blanket and a pillow. She didn't want to leave him alone after the scare. She came back into the living room and made a makeshift bed on the rug next to him. "Good night, Rocky," she whispered. Rocky let out a contented sigh. He stretched his front paws out, one of them touching Hope's arm. The next morning, the sun was shining. The storm had washed away the dust and the heat, leaving the air fresh and cool. Hope woke up to a strange feeling. Something heavy was resting on her legs. She opened her eyes and lifted her head. Rocky had moved during the night. He had dragged his heavy body off his expensive orthopedic bed and had curled up on the rug right next to her. His head was resting on her ankles. Hope smiled, tears pricking her eyes again. He had chosen to be close to her. When she sat up, Rocky woke up. He lifted his head and thumped his tail on the floor. Thump, thump, thump. It was a strong, happy sound. "Good morning," Hope said, scratching behind his ears. He stood up, groaning a little with the effort. But his movement was more fluid than before. He walked to the back door and looked back at her waiting. He wasn't trying to escape. He just needed to go out. Hope opened the door, and they walked out into the backyard together. The grass was wet and cool on his healing feet. He walked around the yard, sniffing the wet earth. He didn't look at the fence with longing. He didn't look for a way out. He finished his business and turned around. He looked at the back door where Hope was standing. He trotted back to her, his tail wagging low and steady. He had decided to stay. However, the recovery was far from over. His feet were healing, but his teeth were still causing him pain. Dr. Evans had said that once he was strong enough, he would need surgery to remove the rotten teeth. It would be a risk because of his age and his heart. A week later, Hope had to go back to work. She was worried about leaving him. She set up a camera in the living room so she could watch him from her phone. "I have to go to work, Rocky," she told him, putting on her uniform. "But I will be back. I promise. I always come back." Rocky watched her put on the uniform. He seemed to recognize it. He sniffed her boots. Maybe he remembered the uniform from the day she saved him. Or maybe he remembered that uniforms meant duty. He didn't whine when she left. He just sat by the window. Throughout the day, Hope checked the camera. Rocky wasn't pacing. He wasn't clawing at the door. He was sleeping on his bed or watching the squirrels through the window. He was waiting, but it was a patient waiting, not a panicked one. When Hope pulled into the driveway that evening, she was tired. It had been a long day. As she walked up the steps, she heard a sound from inside. It was a low, deep bark. She unlocked the door and opened it. Rocky was standing there. His tail was wagging so hard his whole back half was wiggling. He had a toy in his mouth, a stuffed bear she had bought him that he had ignored for days. He dropped the bear at her feet and looked up at her, his eyes bright. "Hi, buddy." Hope laughed, dropping her keys. "Did you miss me?" He nudged her hand with his nose. He was greeting her. He was welcoming her home. It was in that moment that Hope realized the transition was complete. He was no longer the dog trying to find his way back to the past. He was Rocky, and he was home. But life has a way of testing peace, just when you think you have found it. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon, Hope was in the backyard with Rocky. He was walking much better now, the bandages finally off his paws, leaving behind thick, pink scar tissue. He was sniffing around the base of an old oak tree. Suddenly, a car pulled into the driveway. It wasn't a friend. It was a truck Hope didn't recognize. Rocky froze. He lifted his head and stared at the truck. His hackles, the fur along his spine, stood up. A low growl started deep in his chest. A man stepped out of the truck. He was tall, wearing work boots and jeans. He looked around the property with a sour expression. Hope walked to the gate, her hand instinctively resting on Rocky's collar. "Can I help you?" The man looked at Hope, and then his eyes landed on Rocky. His expression shifted from annoyance to surprise, and then to something that looked like greed. "Well, be damned," the man said, walking closer to the fence. "I thought that old mutt was dead." Hope felt a cold chill wash over her. She recognized the voice from the description Dr. Evans had given. It was Arthur's son. "You're the son?" Hope said, her voice turning hard as stone. "Yeah," the man said. "I'm Davidson. The vet told me you took the dog. I was in the area clearing out my dad's estate. Thought I'd swing by." Rocky didn't wag his tail. He didn't run to the fence to greet the man. He pressed his body against Hope's leg, growling louder. He remembered the car ride. He remembered the farm. He remembered being left behind. "What do you want?" Hope asked. "Well," the man said, leaning on the fence post, "I see you got him fixed up. Looks like he's moving okay. Dad had some fancy papers for him. Said he was from a champion line or something. If he's healthy, he might be worth something after all. Maybe I was too hasty." Hope's blood boiled. She felt Rocky trembling against her leg. Not from fear this time, but from tension. He was ready to defend her. He was ready to defend his home. "You abandoned him," Hope said, stepping in front of Rocky. "You dumped him 50 miles away to die. You told the vet you wanted him disposed of." "I changed my mind," the man shrugged. "He's my property. My dad left everything to me. That includes the dog." He reached his hand over the fence as if to snap his fingers at Rocky. "Here, boy. Come here." Rocky didn't move. He stared at the man with eyes that were cold and intelligent. He didn't take a single step toward his old life. He looked up at Hope, waiting for her command. Hope looked at the man, then down at the dog who had walked through fire to find loyalty, only to realize that loyalty had to be earned. "He is not property," Hope said, her voice shaking with rage. "And he is not going anywhere." The man narrowed his eyes. "You can't just keep my dog, lady. I could call the sheriff." Hope smiled, a dangerous, sharp smile. She tapped the badge on her belt. "I am the police," she said, "and I have the vet records documenting severe neglect and abandonment. I have pictures of his feet when I found him. I have the statement from the vet where you authorized his euthanasia. If you want to take this to court, I will charge you with animal cruelty so fast your head will spin. You will face jail time and fines that will cost more than anything you think this dog is worth." The man blinked. He looked at the badge. He looked at Rocky, who was now showing his teeth in a silent snarl. He stepped back from the fence. "Fine," he muttered, waving his hand dismissively. "Keep the useless thing. He was always a pain in the neck anyway." He turned around, got back in his truck, and backed out of the driveway, gravel spinning under his tires. Hope watched him go until the truck disappeared down the road. Her heart was pounding. She looked down at Rocky. He stopped growling. He looked at the empty road, then looked up at Hope. He licked her hand, a long, sloppy lick. He knew what had just happened. He knew she had fought for him. He knew, with absolute certainty, that she would never let him go. "He's gone, Rocky," Hope whispered, kneeling down to hug him. "He can't hurt you anymore." Rocky let out a happy bark and ran back to the oak tree, picking up a stick. He brought it to Hope, dropping it at her feet. He wanted to play. The past was gone. The man in the truck was gone. Arthur was a memory, but a gentle one now. Hope threw the stick. Rocky ran after it, his limp almost gone, his tail flying high like a banner of victory. He was home. Time has a way of moving differently when you are loving an old dog, because every day feels like a stolen treasure that you have snatched away from fate. Although the confrontation with Arthur's son had been ugly, it served as the final lock on the door of Rocky's past. And now the house belonged to him just as much as it belonged to Hope. Winter arrived in the county with a vengeance that year, bringing heavy snows and bitter winds that rattled the window panes. But inside the small house, everything was warm. Rocky had discovered the magic of the fireplace, and it became his throne where he spent the long evenings. Since his coat was thin from age and his joints ached when the pressure dropped, Hope bought him a thick wool sweater that he wore with a surprising amount of dignity. He did not try to chew it off or shake it loose. He seemed to understand that it was another layer of protection she was giving him. The routine of their life settled into a rhythm that was as steady as a heartbeat. Because Hope worked shifts, Rocky learned to tell time not by a clock, but by the sound of her car engine and the specific way her keys jingled when she walked up the porch steps. When she left in the morning, he would walk her to the door, his nails clicking softly on the hardwood, and he would give her a serious look that seemed to say, "Be safe out there," before he turned back to his bed. When she returned, he was always right there waiting, his tail sweeping the floor in slow, heavy arcs of joy. He was no longer looking for Arthur, and he was no longer looking for a way out. He was exactly where he wanted to be. However, the journey he had taken had left its mark on him in ways that food and rest could not entirely fix. As the months turned into a year, the reality of his age began to show itself more clearly. He was 15, maybe 16, which is a lifetime for a German shepherd. And while his spirit was willing, his body was a tired machine that was slowly winding down. The walks they took in the evenings became shorter and shorter. In the beginning, they would walk to the end of the block and back, but eventually they only made it to the big oak tree in the front yard. Rocky would stop there, sniffing the air deeply as if reading the news of the neighborhood. And then he would look at Hope with tired eyes, signaling that he was ready to go back inside. Hope never rushed him. She would stand there for as long as he wanted, letting him be a dog, letting him feel the wind in his fur, because she knew that a day would come when he wouldn't be able to stand there at all. One evening in late spring, just as the flowers were starting to push through the thawing ground, the first bad sign appeared. Hope was in the kitchen making dinner when she heard a heavy thud from the living room, a sound that was dead weight hitting the floor. She dropped her spoon and ran in to find Rocky lying awkwardly on the rug, his back legs splayed out behind him like a frog. He was panting, his eyes wide with confusion and a little bit of fear because he was trying to push himself up with his front legs, but his back half simply refused to listen. Hope fell to her knees beside him, her hands gentle on his hips, and she whispered calm words to stop him from panicking. She wrapped her arms around his chest and helped him lift his heavy body, supporting his weight until he could get his footing again. He stood there for a moment, trembling, leaning against her leg for balance, and he licked her hand as an apology for falling. That night, Hope called Dr. Evans, although she already knew what he was going to say. The vet came to the house the next day because Rocky hated the car now, and after a quiet examination in the living room, Dr. Evans confirmed that time was winning the battle. Rocky's hips were failing, a common curse for his breed, and the nerve endings were degenerating. There was no surgery that could fix it at his age, and there was no magic pill that could reverse the clock. They could manage the pain with medication, and they could make him comfortable, but the road was narrowing. Hope listened to the doctor while stroking Rocky's ears, and she made a silent promise to him right then and there. She promised him that she would be his legs when his failed, and she promised him that she would never let him suffer, just because she wasn't ready to say goodbye. Life changed after that. Hope bought a sling, a padded harness that went under his belly, and she used it to help him walk out to the yard. She moved his bed right next to hers in the bedroom, so that if he needed anything in the night, she would hear him instantly. Their world became smaller, shrinking down to the size of the house and the patch of grass in the backyard. But it also became deeper, because they couldn't go on adventures. They found adventure in the quiet moments. They sat on the back porch for hours, watching the squirrels chase each other, with Hope drinking her coffee and Rocky resting his heavy head on her foot. She talked to him constantly, telling him about her day, about the cases she was working on, about her childhood, and he would listen with his ears perked, his brown eyes fixed on her face as if he understood every single word. Perhaps he did not understand the grammar, but he understood the tone, and he understood that he was the most important thing in her world. There were good days when the medication worked well, and he would wake up with a spark in his eye. On those days, he would grab his stuffed bear, the one he had finally accepted as his own, and shake it violently, growling a playful, rumbly growl that made Hope laugh out loud. He would even try to trot a few steps in the kitchen when he heard the sound of the cheese wrapper opening, because cheese was his absolute favorite treat. Those days were gold. Hope hoarded them like a miser, taking pictures and videos, capturing the light in his eyes and the gray on his muzzle. But there were also bad days, days when he wouldn't eat, days when looking into his eyes was like looking into a deep, foggy well. On those days, Hope would lie on the floor with him, reading a book or just holding his paw, letting him know that it was okay to be tired. Summer turned into autumn again, marking a full year since she had found him in that field. The air turned crisp, and the leaves began to fall, covering the ground in shades of red and gold. It was on a Tuesday morning, nearly a year to the day of his rescue, that the shift happened. Rocky didn't wake up when Hope sat up in bed. Usually he would lift his head and thump his tail, but this morning he lay perfectly still, his breathing shallow and labored. Hope touched his shoulder, and he opened his eyes, but the light was dim. He tried to lift his head to greet her, but it was too heavy, and he let it sink back onto the pillow with a soft groan. He didn't want his breakfast. He didn't even want the piece of cheese she offered him. He just looked at her, and in that look, the communication was clear and devastating. He was tired, not the kind of tired that comes from a long walk, but the kind of tired that comes from a long life. The soldier was ready to lay down his sword. Hope called in sick to work. She knew this was it. She didn't panic and she didn't cry, at least not yet, because he needed her to be strong. She called Dr. Evans, and her voice was steady when she asked him to come over in the evening. She wanted Rocky to have one last perfect day. She wanted his final memories to be of sun and love, not of needles and cold tables. Since the sun was shining unexpectedly warm for October, she carried him. He was lighter now than he had been, having lost muscle mass. Out to the back porch, she laid him on his favorite thick blanket in a patch of sunlight that filtered through the turning leaves of the oak tree. She sat next to him on the wood planks. She had gone to the grocery store earlier and bought a prime rib steak. She cooked it rare, cut it into small, manageable pieces, and fed it to him by hand. Even though he hadn't wanted his kibble, he ate the steak. He ate it slowly, savoring the taste, licking the juices from her fingers with a gentle, sandpaper tongue. It was a feast fit for a king, and he was the king of this backyard. After he ate, he seemed to gain a little burst of energy. He lifted his head and sniffed the wind. He watched a blue jay land on the fence, his ears twitching with interest. For a few hours, it felt like time had suspended itself, holding its breath just for them. Hope talked to him. She told him what a good boy he was. She told him about how he had saved her just as much as she had saved him. She told him that Arthur was waiting for him, and that he wouldn't have to walk to find him this time. He would just close his eyes and be there. Rocky listened, blinking slowly. His body relaxed in the warmth of the sun. He wasn't in pain anymore. Or perhaps the pain just didn't matter as much as the peace he was feeling. He was surrounded by the scent of home and the presence of the person who had become his entire world. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the grass, Dr. Evans's car pulled into the driveway. Rocky didn't bark. He knew Dr. Evans, and he associated him with relief. The doctor walked around to the backyard, his bag in his hand, and he paused when he saw them. He didn't rush. He walked over slowly and sat down on the other side of Rocky. He touched Rocky's head, and Rocky leaned into the touch, accepting the comfort. "Is it time?" Dr. Evans asked softly, looking at Hope. Hope looked at Rocky. He was resting his chin on her thigh. He looked up at her, and his eyes were soft. There was no fear there, only a deep, profound trust. He was telling her that it was okay. He was ready. "Yes," Hope whispered, tears finally spilling over and running down her cheeks. "It's time. He's ready to go." Dr. Evans nodded and opened his bag. He explained everything he was doing in a calm, low voice, but Hope wasn't really listening to the medical details. She was focused entirely on Rocky. She leaned down and wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in the soft fur behind his ears. She inhaled his scent, dust, sun, and dog, wanting to memorize it forever. I love you, she whispered into his fur. You go find him, okay? You run free. No more sore feet. No more pain. Just running. Dr. Evans administered the first injection, the sedative. Rocky didn't flinch. He let out a long, deep sigh, the kind of sigh you make when you finally lie down in a soft bed after working for a week straight. His heavy body relaxed completely against hope. The tension left his muscles. The little furrow of pain between his eyes smoothed out. He was just sleeping now, drifting into a dream where his legs were young and strong again. He is sleeping deeply, Dr. Evans said gently. He cannot feel anything but your arms. Hope nodded, unable to speak. She held him tighter. Then came the second injection. It was peaceful. There was no struggle, no gasp. One moment he was breathing, a slow, rhythmic rise and fall against her chest. And the next moment, the movement simply stopped. It was as quiet as a candle being blown out. The silence that followed was not heavy like the silence in the field had been. It was sacred. It was the silence of a journey completed. Dr. Evans checked for a heartbeat, held his stethoscope there for a long moment, and then draped it around his neck. He is gone, Hope. Hope didn't let go. She stayed there on the porch floor, holding the shell of her best friend as the sun finally set and the air turned cold. She cried until she was empty, grieving not just for the loss of him, but for the beauty of the soul that had graced her life for this short, miraculous year. He had come to her broken and exhausted, and he had left her whole and loved. In the days that followed, the house felt incredibly big and incredibly empty. Hope found herself walking carefully around the spot where his bed used to be. She caught herself listening for the click of his nails on the floor. Coming home from work was the hardest part because the greeting she had grown so used is gone. There was no tail wagging, no happy face at the door, just the quiet house. However, amidst the grief, there was a feeling of gratitude that was stronger than the pain. Hope decided she needed to do something to honor him. She didn't want his story to end in the ground. She had him cremated, and she placed his wooden box on the mantelpiece above the fireplace, right next to his collar and the stuffed bear he had loved. But that wasn't enough. Rocky had taught her something about the old, the forgotten, and the abandoned. He had shown her that value doesn't disappear with age. 2 weeks later, Hope walked into the police station and requested a meeting with the chief. She had an idea. She proposed a new program called the Rocky Initiative. The plan was simple but powerful. The police department would partner with the local shelter to identify senior dogs, the ones who were always overlooked, the ones deemed too old or too broken, and pair them with foster families, specifically focusing on seniors in the community who were lonely. The department would use a small fund to cover the medical bills for these dogs, removing the financial burden that scared people away from adopting old dogs. The chief listened, looking at the photos Hope had laid out on his desk. Photos of Rocky in the field, looking like a skeleton. Photos of Rocky on his first day home. And finally, a photo of Rocky in the backyard, looking majestic and happy with his steak. He changed the whole town, Hope said. Everyone followed his story. Let's use that. The chief approved it. The story of the German shepherd who walked 50 miles for love didn't end with his death. It exploded when Hope announced the initiative on social media. Telling Rocky's full story for the first time, it went viral. People from all over the country sent donations. But more importantly, people started going to shelters asking for the Rockies. They asked for the dogs with gray muzzles. They asked for the dogs with limps. They asked for the hard cases. 6 months later, Hope was standing in her backyard again. It was spring. The oak tree was budding with new green leaves. She wasn't alone. Lying in the grass near the spot where Rocky had taken his last breath was a new dog. Her name was Betsy, a 12-year-old golden retriever who had been surrendered because her owner went into a nursing home. Betsy was blind in one eye and moved slowly, but she was safe. She was loved. Hope looked at the sky, which was a brilliant, piercing blue. She thought about Rocky. She imagined him somewhere out there beyond the clouds. She pictured him young again, his coat shiny and black, his legs powerful. She pictured him running across a vast, endless field. But this time he wasn't running alone. In her mind, she saw him spotting a figure in the distance, an old man sitting in a chair. She saw Rocky pick up speed, his tail streaming behind him like a flag. She saw him leap, and she saw the old man open his arms. He had finally made it. He had finished his walk. Hope smiled, wiping a single tear from her cheek. She reached down and patted Betsy on the head. "Come on, girl," she said softly. "Let's go inside." The legacy of the dog who refused to give up lived on, not in a statue or a plaque, but in the warm beds of 100 old dogs who were sleeping soundly tonight because one brave soldier had shown the world that love is worth walking 50 miles for, and that every dog, no matter how tired, deserves to find their way home. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. If you enjoyed this story, I promise you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more thrilling as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.